Thank you for taking time to do this. We think we're going to have a fun evening tonight. We've got a very interesting topic. We're going to go ahead and get started. We've promised everybody in the room they can be home by 8:30, so we're going to try and keep to our promise. Before I talk about the Parker Center and our distinguished panel, I've been asked to remind you to save the date. October 21 is the 10th annual Parker Center Business Symposium. I don't know how many of you have had a chance to go out to Sandia Resort and participate in the family business symposiums, but they're great. We've got a number of the keynote speakers who are going to be here in the room who are going to be speaking on the 21st. Vicki Wilcox is here, Doug Brown, Gary Opedal, George Borgader, and Jim Parker. So it's looking to be, I think, a very successful symposium. Please mark the date, October 21, and we'll see you there. Let me begin by thanking the people who put on this lovely dinner tonight. Dee Dee Alvarado did much of the heavy lifting. We appreciate that, Dee Dee. I'd like to extend our thanks and appreciation to the board of the UNM Anderson Parker Center for Family Business. If you're a board member, wave your hand. Let's see who's here. Look at that. That's a lot of folks. And as always, the Parker Center has an affiliation. It's been integrated into UNM. It's the Anderson Business School, which is really one of the shining gems of this state. The Anderson School, for the entire time I've lived in New Mexico, which is most of my life, has been one of the best faculties and best departments at UNM. It has always been prominent under its most recent deans, including Doug Brown, and our current dean. It's really taken off. And so I want to congratulate the Anderson School of Business for all of their success and thank them for all the good things that they've been doing for the Parker Center. Thank you, folks. I've been asked to introduce Dean Hoyt to you. Dean, would you stand up? This is the new dean. And again, I want to extend our appreciation to you for everything. Okay. The Parker Center is the inspiration of Jim and Linda Parker. It's the premier resource in New Mexico for family business, for planning, management, and growth. It has a distinguished and very expert board of directors. It's got a robust association with the Anderson School, and its central mission right now is to educate. As part of that mission, we have been debating how to go about the education effort and how to exploit the enormous talent and knowledge of people who have been serving on the board, who have been recruited to serve on the board. We all know that the expert is somebody from out of state, but sometimes expertise is right under our noses. And this is in fact an experiment to try and take advantage of nationwide talent with respect to education that exists right here at Albuquerque. Tonight we have three real experts who are going to talk with us on a fascinating topic involving business succession. They also, all three of them are my real friends and longtime buddies. Let me begin, if I may, by introducing Jim Parker. Not that he needs any introduction to anybody here, but I'm going to anyway. I don't know how many of you know this, but Jim is the dean of the tax and corporate lawyers in New Mexico. He's the #1 tax and corporate lawyer in the state of New Mexico. It's a real privilege to know him, to have had him as one of my mentors. He's one of the principal lawyers in one of the most esteemed law firms here in the state of New Mexico, the Maudrell firm. He's nationally recognized in estate planning, employee benefits, and tax. He has numerous honors and awards. He'd get upset with me if I listed them. He's a sweetheart. He's an active member of the community. He's part of the Small Business Council of America, the New Mexico Estate Planning Council, the Corrales Cultural Arts Council. He does work up in Taos. It's a real honor, and I'm looking forward to hearing what he has to say on these particular topics. Bill Ebel, who's also on our panel, is to most of us the face in New Mexico for Northwestern Mutual. I remember Bill, he may not remember this, but many years ago, now decades ago, when I was in law school, Bill came to UNM's law school to try and recruit me to come and work for Northwestern Mutual. And there have been times when I wish I had. He has an MS in financial services. He's an accredited estate planner. He's a chartered life underwriter and financial consultant, also an active member of the community, working with the Albuquerque Community Foundation, United Way, Rotary, AED, and the Central New Mexico Estate Planning Council. Our third panelist, Henry South, is one of New Mexico's great accountants. He's the managing director of Atkinson & Company. He's an expert on business and succession issues from a financial perspective, also an active member of our community, serving on the Samaritan Counseling Center, the New Mexico Entrepreneurs Association, and both the American and New Mexico CPA societies. So would you please welcome three very distinguished panelists. How many of you have brothers and sisters? Okay. How many of you have children? How many of you have or had parents? We're going to talk about family, and we're going to talk about family from an angle that almost all estate planning has to deal with, and it is absolutely fraught with peril. It's the arena of talking with clients about estate plans versus succession planning in terms of whether you should differentiate between your children and your grandchildren in terms of their inheritance. What we're trying to do is set the stage a little bit about the difference between estate planning and succession planning. Those phrases are phrases everybody hears. Different practitioners and advisors think about them differently. Tell us about the planning process from your perspective in terms of standardization in one, uniqueness in the other.
The parents and the children need to make sure that the kids are really committed and they're not just doing what they think mom and dad want them to. And I think that happens sometimes and it ends up not working long term. So an open communication between generations on what the business is really like, what kind of risk is involved, what kind of emotional attachment do you need, what kind of education, what kind of investment is really important. And I've known some people that have had their children work with go out and work outside the family business and then come back so they could appreciate more what they had at home. And that level of commitment is a really big part of the success of a business. I think only like 30% of business that go from one generation to the next succeed. And only 10% succeed into the third generation. And that factor has to be one of the keys on whether or not a family business is going to be part of the 30%. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you. Jim, talk to the issue, and again, we're just trying to put some concepts out there. We're going to ground this in a story that's going to be more immediate and help emphasize these points. Talk though in terms of business survival and control issues when you're dealing with succession planning as compared to estate planning.
Well, with regard to the survival of the business, there must be, as Bill indicated, be a commitment of the next generation to learn about the business and participate in the business. And if there's not that commitment, then there's going to be a sale one way or the other in with regard to the business. If you do have that commitment of the children business, then you need to do planning. And that planning must involve everyone in the family. The stakeholders are not only the parents and the children involved in the business, but their spouses and the children who are not involved in the business. And their spouses. They're all stakeholders because they think they have an interest in the estate. The other thing is that when you start those discussions, many times you'll find out there's a problem in the family. I've had situations where we started the discussion and on Saturday morning, and one of the daughters said, "Dad, you're retired. I don't know whether I can work with you anymore or not." Well, that stopped the succession planning discussion. And we spent the morning talking about governance. They had governance in place in the corporate documents, but Father didn't follow it. So we set up a plan to follow it at committees and officers, directors, and have the appropriate meetings.
Okay, thank you. All right, our last question before we get into our fact pattern. I'm going to tee this question up. It's for Bill, but I want to tee it up in a particular way. On Tuesday, I was called by an LA law firm. I'm an attorney here in Albuquerque, and they asked me if I would go up to Santa Fe and help an elderly couple up in Santa Fe sign an amendment to their trust. I said, of course. So I went up, it was an excuse to get up to Santa Fe, so I took it. And I went up there and I met this couple, lovely couple, very elderly, and got them signed up on their estate planning documents. Took about 15 minutes. And as we were wrapping up, the gentleman, probably in his late 80s, said, can we ask you a question? Of course. We're not entirely certain that we're getting the full range of advice that we want. And I said, okay, what's up? That's not nearly as seductive an approach as it may sound when somebody says that. And he said, we think that we would like to leave more of our estate. And these guys are worth megabucks. We want to leave more of our estate to one of our sons and not to the other. I said, okay. I said, fantastic. You need to come to the dinner we're having in 2 nights. But this is real life stuff. They had a situation where they had 2 sons with disparate successes, different skill sets, and they wanted to know if it was permissible to differentiate between their children with respect to what they inherit and what the issues might be. So I referred them back to their LA lawyer and came racing back to Albuquerque thinking, I've got a great tee-up story for Bill, which is, do you think it's acceptable to differentiate between children in terms of people's estate plans? And the question is equitable versus equal treatment. Give us your thoughts on that.
Jay, distribution of assets between children where one is bringing that around to where one is in the business and another isn't. You have to ask that question because just this little example, if you have a business that's worth $2 million when the son or daughter come into the business and grow it, and because of that son or daughter's effort and mom and dad taking more and more time off, it still grows to $5 million. Should the child who's not there helping it grow inherit half of everything or half of what was there when one child started? And that's a tough question to answer. And then on the other hand, speaking of being fair, is the child who's not in the business and has no interest in the business want to own part of it or half of it. assuming we're going to keep the business intact, and then have to be responsible for calls on notes, for borrowing money when times are bad, for the risk that goes, the liability risk that goes as an owner. So, anyway, that's a couple of thoughts, and then I might add to that, two examples. I talked to one guy and asked him, I always ask people, what do they want to have happen to their business or their estate when they're done, when they're ready to retire or die or whatever. And one guy said, I'm going to leave everything to my son who's working in the business, and I know he'll take care of his sister. I just about fell on the floor. Now contrast that with when the answer comes this way. Again, son of the business, daughter happens to be a school teacher in Dallas. And they said, well, we've sat down and talked about this, and we talked to our daughter. She has no interest in the business, and she's perfectly happy to get a fair amount of cash in place of any claim on the business. And that works out well because the brother didn't want the business. But they figured out if none of it was fair to her, the parents made a commitment. Now, in their case, they didn't have the cash sitting around that wasn't being used in their business because that was most of the estate. So they bought a life insurance policy payable to the daughter at the death of the father to take care of that obligation. A little bit off the track of this, Jay, that reminds me, as I was going through the stories of the case we're about to talk about, I found 12 different places where the leverage that life insurance creates could enhance the planning that we'll be talking about here today. So anyway, that was a long-winded answer.
All right, well, we'll get into it, and we're gonna ground this now in a story. Henry, can you pull up the slides that feature Tom and Susie Murphy?
So Jay, while he's pulling up the slides, I heard a great guy say one time, if you don't know where you're going, be careful, because you might not get there. And Jim probably already recognizes that with Yogi Berra.
Okay, so we've developed a fact pattern. We're representing Tom and Susie Murphy, and when I say we're representing, everybody has different occupations, doing different things for the Murphy family. Tom Murphy, 65, Susie Murphy. They have two primary businesses here in New Mexico. Tom is a pharmacist, and he runs City Pharmacy here in Albuquerque with his middle daughter, Shirley. Together, they're the pharmacists at City Pharmacy. Independent of City Pharmacy, Susie Murphy, his wife, has inherited ABC Well Servicing Company, a very successful well servicing company. And she's active in it, but it's primarily run by the oldest son, Steve Murphy, and by Shirley's husband. And you'll notice that we're giving you a wrinkle early. Shirley's husband, Terry Thompson, helps Susie run the well servicing company. So two businesses, City Pharmacy and ABC Well Servicing. There are, however, other spouses and other children. Sandra is a teacher, and she's married to Joe Smith, a very successful plaintiff's contingency lawyer. We're always going up against Joe Smith. And they all have a variety of kids of teen years. So, just to review the bidding, mom and dad, 3 adult children, everybody's married, one is involved in the pharmacy, another one is involved in the well servicing company, the third one is not involved in the business at all, and one of the spouses is involved. Everybody got the fact pattern? That's sort of what it is. All right, let's do the next slide. Okay, we're going to start with City Pharmacy. Let's look at the financial statement slide. These guys are doing well. They've got a nice home here in the city. They own the building. $500,000, City Pharmacy. The building and the land and the operations of the business for ABCOL servicing are close to $4 million altogether in value. The couple together has oil and gas interests of over $3 million, and they've done well. They've paid attention to Bill in terms of building up their profit-sharing plan and their life insurance. So they've done all the right things. And they come to us, they come to our panel, and they say, help us do an estate plan, but not just an estate plan. Help us figure out how to deal with succession. What's going to happen to the two businesses? What should we do with the oil and gas interests? How should we treat our children? So I'm going to start the question. Mr. Parker, do you think, I'm going to ask just, let me start with City Pharmacy to make it simpler. City Pharmacy has Dad, Tom, and Shirley, daughter, as pharmacists. How do you approach the question of succession in talking with Dad?
The first question that you have to ask is Shirley qualified to operate the business? And the second question is, does she want to operate the business? She may be very happy just to be a pharmacist, not worry about payroll, employees, stocking pharmacy. She's happy to get up and go to work at 9 in the morning, go home at 5, and let her dad worry about all that. So if that being the case, then fathers have to look at other exit strategies with regard to pharmacy. If she is interested in the pharmacy, then you need to sit down and visit with her about the succession plan and determine her interest, her commitment, and look at a long-range plan. It's important that you start these succession plans early. The worst thing they can do is wait until the individual is 80 years old and then say, well, maybe I want to retire 5 or 10 years, and so my kids will take over. It's like the story of the individual who had a son in his business, and at 85, he was still operating the business, and his son came in his office and said, you know, Dad, you always told me this business is going to be mine. But I'm turning 65 next week, and I'm retiring. So it's very important that you find out your commitment and determine the qualifications. And determining qualifications is a very difficult issue up front.
Very good. Henry, can I go back a slide? These are our players, and it'll be a little easier to follow this. Bill, do you think that Tom and Susie should leave the pharmacy to Shirley?
Go ahead and repeat that into the mic.
Do you think that the parents should leave the pharmacy to their pharmacist daughter?
Yes, with one caveat that I would add to
You need a microphone.
Jim's explanation, and that is that we need to find out that she is capable of running. One thing is if she wants to, and the other thing is if she's capable of it. And it should go to her in that case. However, it needs to be brought into the scope of the whole estate plan and all the other assets, assuming the parents are trying to the best they can, distribute at least the value of assets equal between the children. That would just giving her a call and means she might get a little less somewhere else.
All right, Henry, let's follow up on that. If daughter Shirley inherits the pharmacy, how do you approach equalization of inheritance for the other siblings?
Well, that's a difficult thing to make happen. Because first you have to determine the value. And then after that, if you're trying to equal everything, as you soften them. In the financials, it's a little tough. There's very little cash. And for you to get there, one of the things we talk talked about that Bill put on the table is possibility of life insurance to help even out the cash flow. But the one biggest thing you can do, or worst thing you can do, is just try to divide up everything equally and walk away. That's going to cause chaos and turmoil among your kids, and it may split a family up on there never was such an intention in the first place.
Jim?
I have one comment with regard to Deborah's answer, and that is that we need to also look at the participation of the daughter and what value she may have added to the business over the years. So you may want to go look at, do an analysis of the value of the business when she came to work and try to determine what percentage of appreciation and value is attributable to her services and not charge her with those.
What if Shirley, daughter, does not want to inherit the pharmacy? She's sick of it.
Well, then the father has the option of selling out. One way you can go and find a national pharmacy that would like to come in and buy the pharmacy. And then Shirley wants to continue to work for them. I've had a client do that. We have had situations where they say, well, I want to use an ESOP as a way to take the value I've got in this business and take it out if it's a C corporation and take that money out and reinvest in investment securities within a year of the sale and never have to pay tax on it if I hold those securities until my death. And that's certainly an option. Another is if there are other professional employees in the business, or you could go hire another pharmacist to come in and sell the pharmacy to that individual. And it would result in some reduction in income for Shirley perhaps, while that new pharmacist comes in. And while he's learning the business with the city pharmacy, she may have less income, but we have to have income to pay to the new pharmacist. That would result in the father then now perhaps a larger amount.
Okay. Bill?
Jim, as a follow-up to that, I have a question. I think most in our audience have heard of the term ESOP. And the question I have from the standpoint of the cost involved, is there a minimum asset value or business value where an ESOP becomes impractical, or is that pretty much work in every situation?
Well, it depends. For example, in this situation, if they sold ESOP, if they moved the real estate into the corporation, it's never a good idea. But it might be in this situation. They moved in, that gives significant value, could turn, make it very reasonable to do, because you do have annual expenses with an ESOP. You have to do an annual evaluation. It's a qualified plan, so you have to have the appropriate plan document, and you have to administer that plan on a year-to-year basis. But at the value we show up here, it's marginal at that point.
Let me give some context. The question that Tom and his wife are facing is, do they give or sell the pharmacy to their daughter? Is she interested in taking on the pharmacy and continuing it? And if she isn't, how do they continue the pharmacy, or do they sell it? And the question of selling businesses, family-owned businesses, is an interesting one. Most people try to sell their businesses to key employees if they can't sell it to family. If they can't sell it to key employees, a lot of times they will engage brokers to help them to try and find national buyers to buy their business. An ESOP, which is a phrase everybody's heard of, which is sort of technical, is a method of creating a fictional buyer using your profit-sharing plan. The profit-sharing plan actually goes and buys the business by borrowing money from a bank. And it's a very powerful tool when people cannot otherwise find either family or key employees or national buyers to buy their business, but they're very, very technical. Let me move along a little bit. If the pharmacy is sold, the daughter doesn't want to take on the pharmacy, should she get a disproportionate amount or a bonus because she helped build its value? In other words, either an advance against her inheritance or something specific out of the estate for the contribution she made. Henry?
Well, I think Jim touched on it a little bit earlier. One of the things we want to do is look at the contribution that the daughter's made to the value of the business. If she came in, she's only been an employee, then there's no bonus or deduction, I would think, in trying to even up the values. But if she had a significant impact on the business and it's double the size of the business because of her involvement, even though she may want to retire now and get out, you know, you need to make in your calculations, you need to be able to figure out a value and an extra amount for all the hard work and everything that she's done to create value for the estate. And I would think that she would have in the first claim on it, but there's a disproportionate allocation for all the hard work that she's done for the business.
Okay, now we get to the colorful part of this little subsection. Let's say that mom and dad want to leave a disproportionate amount of their estate to the daughter for helping build the pharmacy. And they set up their estate plan with Jim to do that. Should they discuss the issue of the pharmacy with the other siblings? Jim, what do you think?
Absolutely. You have to have that meeting with the stakeholders. You start first with the parents to get their ideas of what they would like to see happen, what they think will happen. And once you outline that, then you have the meeting with the stakeholders and you lay it on the table. You have to indicate that you want the discussions to be open, you want them to be respectful to everyone in the room. I want them to ask any question they want to ask. It's got to be an open forum. We use the term so often now here, transparency. It has to be the ultimate transparency in this situation. If you don't, you're going to have to.
Bill, what do you think?
I agree with Jim. The communication and understanding up front ahead of time is, even though it might mean some tough bumps, it's going to work better in the long run for family harmony.
Henry, you agree?
I think it's important.
Take your mic.
To know that hope is not a business philosophy, and it's not a great plan either. Many times what happens is that it's a difficult transition to make. It's hard to do this. So sometimes you say, you know what, after my passing, I know they'll work it all out. It's probably the worst way of saying anything because it just causes so much conflict. And I've seen families come apart because of it. So, yeah, what Jim was saying about transparency and doing everything up front, absolutely.
Okay, we're going to move to the next business because it's got a wrinkle in it. We're going to talk about ABC Well Servicing, which you can see has a lot of value. It's got a building and land worth $1.2 million. The company itself generates close to $3 million. I'm looking at $2.75 million in terms of its revenue. If you'll go back a slide. Susie inherited ABC Well Servicing from her dad. What does that mean? It means it's her separate property. It's not community property. Henry, would you go back to the financial statement? Tom and his wife have total assets of close to $12 million, but they're not owned equally because Susie owns as her own separate property close to $4 million, ABC Well Servicing building, land, and the business itself. So, will you go back to the prior slide? We talked about the oldest son, Tom, being involved in the business. I'm sorry, Tom is dad. He's the chair. The oldest son, Steve, is the president of the business, and a spouse acts as vice president. So let me begin the analysis with Jim, because he's going to help us understand this. How do you handle the issue of separate property for both estate planning and succession planning?
Well, first of all, today, we have a lifetime exemption of $5,450,000, which will be increasing each year. And with the case we put up here, chances are the estate of Tom is not going to be $5 million, because this half of the community property is not going to reach that amount. So you have to look at equalizing gifts, or equalizing the estate. Husband and wife can make gifts to each other, unlimited gifts with no tax consequences, basically. She can make gifts as part of the plan, and they can split those gifts, and that might help in the long run. But the key is you've got to sit down with them and show them what the effect is going to be upon the death of the first to die, if in this situation Tom dies first, on how to then equalize the estate upon the estate tax return. So not only do you have to consider the succession plan in this situation, you have to consider the estate tax considerations.
What if mom doesn't want to equalize the estate?
Then you're going to have to look at some other ways to pay the estate tax. You're going to have to visit with my friend to my left and talk about life insurance. And it can be expensive at their age, but it may be that it's a solution. We're going to say, I don't want to give to Tom. I saw him the other day with this cute young lady downtown. I don't know what his plans are in the future, so I'm not going to finance that situation.
Bill, what are your thoughts?
Well, one issue is the estate tax implications of this because of the size of our estate. Another one is distribution to the children. And I don't know if it could play out, although the mother, Susie, might want to keep control of that ABC law to herself. She maybe would still be willing to collaborate with Tom and their other assets so that the distribution of ABC wealth at their deaths complements what the rest of their estate is going to be doing, so they can give things to their children in the way they want them.
Henry, what do you think?
Well, I think dollar amounts and estate tax and all that are very important. The problem is you have with an in-law, son-in-law in the business. I'm not sure if Steve and Terry get along. You know, are they going to run this business, or has Dad been there to supervise, to referee all these years? You can have a lot of different things that has nothing to do with the state tax and has everything to do with the success.
Who should mom leave the business to when she dies?
I think Mom can leave it as whoever she wants to.
Who would you recommend that be?
Well, the most likely would be Steve and Terry. And maybe it's a 50-50 split, depending on how much they contribute to the success of the business.
Another thought on that, I think a question that we need to answer whether or not Terry would inherit, remember he's the son-in-law, is whether or not the family, the parents want the assets to go outside of their bloodline. And if they go, if part of that business goes to Terry, then it's outside of the bloodline, and you don't know what might happen to their marriage in the future in various aspects like that. And maybe a thought, and I'd leave it to Jim and Henry to elaborate on this, perhaps a way to do it would be to leave it in trust for Steve and the other kids as they choose. You know, we've left out the lawyer and the school teacher so far. But leave it in trust so it stays in the blood, and yet the generation that's there now has access to it while they're alive.
I think the relationships are very, very important between Steve and Terry. And it may be, like my family, it would be like our daughter-in-law better than our son. So that may be a better situation here. If you see Tyson, be sure to tell him I said that.
She'll like hearing it. So let's talk a little bit more about that. What kind of resentments do you think blood descendants have when spouses inherit? Henry had suggested that the company be left half and half to son and to son-in-law. What kind of resentments do you anticipate?
Well, if it's left half and half, you have 50% ownership. And this is going through a situation where 50/50 ownership can be very ugly. Because you have appropriate provisions of shareholders agreements with put calls and buyouts. That's never a good situation. Again, it's a question of their relationship. And also, it's a question, speaking of relationships, the relationships of their spouses. We all go home, we sit down at dinner, watch the TV, and all of a sudden the sound goes off and your spouse wants to talk about something. And it may be about something that goes on in her office or my office, and it's a situation that happens in every family. And so spouses need to be involved in this very much, and if they get along, that's good. If they're like sisters, if they're not, that could be a problem. So the family dynamics are very much a part of this. But following up on the theme of what you learn in the bloodline, it can be set up so the interest of Terry would be placed in a trust for him for his life, and upon his death, it would be held for his wife's benefit, and then upon her death, to the children. And that way, the family would get the benefit of those assets during their lifetime.
Okay, so let's pretend for a moment that Susie and Tom have left the pharmacy to Shirley, and that they left ABC Well Servicing half to Steve and half to Terry. The thing that jumps out at me immediately is that a whole lot of value has ended up with Shirley and Terry over here, and we're going to have to do some equalization, or you're going to have some real problems with the kids. So let's go to the next slide, Henry. And let's look at some of the other non-business assets. We've talked about the pharmacy, we talked about the well servicing company, but we've got lots of value in passive investments. Oil and gas interests of over 3 million, CDs, the profit sharing plan of over 1.5 million, some life insurance. Henry, talk a little bit about the question before us, which is, if we're going to leave business assets to actively involved participant children, should you equalize using passive investments for some of the other children? Your thoughts?
Well, it's one of the things about passive investments is trying to make a smooth out between everybody. And many times, passive investments are better if they're all held together from a management standpoint and like. So, anyways, in a business, you take all the passive investments, put them in a trust for the kids, with each getting a different percentage of it to help equalize the estate and the income that's swimming out to the kids, depending on whether they participated in the pharmacy or not, or the well servicing company.
See, I see a problem. Actually, I see 10 problems, but one of the problems I see is that if I'm a child that's not actively involved in the businesses, and you give me oil and gas interests and a piece of the profit sharing plan in order to equalize my investments with my siblings who are involved in the businesses, my life may be easier than theirs. They're trying to run a business. They have the ups and downs of running a business, and I have this equivalent value that I can just put into mutual funds. What are your thoughts on that?
And if you determine, and we talked about this earlier, if the child in either of those businesses is responsible for the growth, maybe they get a disproportionate interest in that business. And then the oil and gas interest, which as you can see is a large interest up there, gets split disproportionately to account that, but take into account growth created by the child that's in a given business.
What do you think, Ken?
That's good idea. Jim?
Yes. One thing I want to mention about the oil and gas interest. If you don't take anything away this evening, if your family has oil and gas interest, please put those in an LLC. It will certainly make it easier for the lawyers to deal with those, to deal with your estate. Having dealt recently with an estate where oil and gas man had oil and gas interest in 8 states, we had 8 ancillary probates. And trying to figure out what middle interest is wrong has been an absolute nightmare. If you establish ownership in the LLC, transferring ownership to the LLC from generation to generation to generation is very, very easy.
Okay, folks. Well, what we've identified is a family that has 2 very disparate kinds of businesses with different children involved in it. It has a catch of assets that it can use to equalize values between children. We haven't even gotten into the questions of what to do with grandchildren, the questions of how to use trusts, but we've tried to give a flavor for the fact that it is okay to differentiate between who inherits what, but that it's got to be handled with intentionality and thoughtfulness. What I'd like to do, we're right on time. You've got a very sophisticated panel, and hopefully we've triggered some thoughts.